я бы попросил начальника генерального штаба доложить еще об одном событии. Я так коротенько упомянул о нем в своем вступительном слове. Речь идет о испытании крылатой ракеты неограниченной дальности «Буревестник» с ядерной энергетической установкой.
Товарищ Верховный командующий, такое испытание было проведено 21 октября. Действительно, отличие его от предыдущих испытаний, что был осуществлен многочасовой полет ракеты, и в ходе которого она преодолела расстояние 14 тысяч километров. И это не предел. И
на ядерной установке.
На ядерной силовой установке, да. И та технические характеристики «Буревестник» вообще позволяет применять ее с гарантированной точностью по высокозащищенным объектам на любом расстоянии. Кроме того, в ходе полета ракеты были выполнены все заданные вертикальные и горизонтальные маневры, и тем самым продемонстрированы ее высокие возможности по обходу средств противоракетной и противовоздушной обороны.
That was Russia's President Vladimir Putin talking to Russia's Chief of the General Staff of Armed Forces, Valery Gerasimov. The top Russian general told President Putin that the Burevestnik missile traveled 14,000 kilometers and was in the air for about 15 hours. What is the Burevestnik, Russia's nuclear-powered missile? Why is Russia building such a weapon? Which countries are engaged in a nuclear arms race? And what's the history and evolution of nuclear weapons? We explore this and more on this week's WION Wide Angle. On the 26th of October, the Kremlin released a video in which the Russian president, dressed in a military uniform, announced a successful testing of the unique weapon. President Vladimir Putin said the Burevestnik, a nuclear-powered and nuclear-capable cruise missile, can defeat any defense system in existence today. The test, conducted on October 21, came alongside a nuclear drill, marking a high point in Moscow's show of military readiness.
I'm not going to be wasting my time.
The announcement also coincides with US President Donald Trump taking a tougher stance on Russia to push for a ceasefire. So, what is the Burevestnik? What makes it invincible to current and future missile defenses? Let's find out. The missile, officially designated 9M730 Burevestnik, is a ground-launched, low-flying cruise missile, capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. The project was first revealed by Putin in 2018, during which he said that the missile would have an unlimited range and ability to evade Western missile defenses. The name Burevestnik translates to storm petrel, which means a type of seabird in Russian. While the NATO has its own nickname, they call it the SSC-X9 Skyfall. The weapon is both nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed, giving it capabilities distinct from conventional cruise missiles. Burevestnik is equipped with a miniature nuclear reactor, allowing it to remain airborne for extended durations and days, and travel around the world without refueling. It's basically like a floating warship flying around the globe, once launched, ready to annihilate its target. Russia has asserted that Burevestnik can fly at extremely low altitudes, roughly 164 to 328 feet above the ground, far lower than conventional cruise missiles. Flying this low would allow the missile to evade radar detection by terrain, masking, and make interception far more challenging. Reportedly, the missile could have a range of up to 20,000 kilometers, enabling it to strike targets anywhere on the planet from within Russian territory. The development of the Burevestnik is established in Moscow's long-standing opposition to the United States' missile defense initiative.
The United States of America is withdrawing from this almost 30-year-old treaty.
When the then President George W. Bush withdrew from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 2001 and expanded NATO's reach in Eastern Europe. Russia considered these moves as direct threats to its nuclear deterrence posture and started developing anti-missile defense systems in the early 2000s. Putin has repeatedly described these Burevestnik as a response to those developments.
Well, the system is intended to defeat a missile defense. And so the idea is because it can fly for basically an unlimited range, then it can fly around defenses. On the other hand, you could build more defenses, or you could use aircraft to go intercept them. So I don't think the system is invincible, but it's part of the deepening arms race that we're in, where they've come up with a new system and now we have to come up with something to shoot it down. I think we are just generally seeing a greater emphasis on nuclear weapons. We're seeing countries use nuclear threats more and more to get their way in the world. And so while I think a lot of these programs have existed for years, if not decades, the reason Putin is doing this on live TV while wearing fatigues is because he wants to send a certain message.
While Burevestnik is being described by Moscow as a triumph of invention, its development has been fraught with difficulties. Defense analysts have documented a series of failed tests since 2017. In 2019, during a weapons test near the White Sea, an accident occurred, which reportedly resulted in the deaths of at least 5 Russian nuclear specialists and caused radiation to spike nearby. The explosion reportedly released radiation into the surrounding area, prompting temporary evacuations. U.S. intelligence agencies later assessed that the test was related to the Burevestnik program.
We know that the Russians have been up at the test site since the middle of the summer. So they've been at this for a long time, and we've seen a lot of activity that we thought were associated with tests. So it's probably the case that there were tests earlier this summer that didn't work, and that what Russia is announcing now is either finally a successful test, or maybe they're just making it all up and they all failed, but they wanted to say it worked. But this program has been tested for a long time, and there's a lot of evidence that past tests have not been successful.
U.S. President Donald Trump has called Russia's nuclear-powered Burevestnik cruise missile test inappropriate and advised his Russian counterpart to focus on ending the conflict with Ukraine. Trump also highlighted the U.S.'s nuclear capabilities, stating that they have a nuclear submarine.
We do have a submarine, a nuclear submarine, and we don't need to go 8,000 miles. And I don't think it's an appropriate thing for Putin to be saying either, by the way. He ought to get the war ended. A war that should have taken 1 week is now in its soon 4th year. That's what he ought to do instead of testing missiles.
The relations between Moscow and Washington have worsened severely. U.S. President Donald Trump, who had sought to mediate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, recently cancelled an in-person meeting with Putin in Budapest after concluding that peace negotiations were not progressing. Ukraine has been pushing for long-range missiles. It wants Tomahawk missiles from the US. Trump is yet to give a go-ahead for the weapon transfer, but Moscow is already drawing a red line. The Kremlin warns that any attack on Russian territory would invite a very serious, if not overwhelming, response. Russia's large nuclear arsenal poses a significant threat, leading some European nations to seek greater nuclear protection. With Trump in the White House, the Europeans now feel Trump can't be relied on solely. It has prompted leaders to urge the UK to open up talks with Berlin over a defense pact. Defense chiefs have said that Britain must look at sharing nuclear weapons with Germany to counter the critical threat posed by Russia. Earlier this year, Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz pitched for talks with the UK and France to extend their nuclear deterrence to Europe. But Merz cautioned, saying that such a move could not replace the US's existing protective shield over Europe. In response, French President Emmanuel Macron showed his willingness to share France's nukes for the protection of others on the continent.
Des Landes gewährleistet.
I acknowledge the fundamental need for us to engage in discussions with France and the UK on how we can continue to provide a joint deterrent response in the future. However, this is explicitly intended as a supplement to our existing commitments with the United States within the NATO alliance.
Gegenwärtig mit den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika im NATO-Bündnis.
France and the UK are the only two countries on the European continent which have nuclear weapons. And within the European Union, only France has them. Currently, France is just short of 300 nuclear warheads, which can be fired from aircraft or from submarines. The UK has about 250 nukes. Therefore, closer cooperation would make sense, but there are some problems. The big difference is that the French arsenal is sovereign, that is, it is developed entirely by France, whereas the UK relies on the US for technical input. The British nuclear forces are closely interconnected with the US and would be available to NATO in the event of a conflict. However, the situation is different in France, which attaches great importance to maintaining the independence of its nuclear forces. So how does the United States' extended nuclear deterrence policy in Europe look like? The commitment to use nuclear weapons to defend allies is a key feature of U.S. declaratory nuclear policy. The 2022 Nuclear Posture Review highlights that as long as nuclear weapons exist, the fundamental role of nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attack on the United States, our allies and partners. As a result, the US nuclear force is expansive and expensive, both. Its nuclear arsenal includes a sea leg, an air leg, and a land leg, which is the second largest in the world, and Washington justifies its size partly on extended deterrence commitments to allies. Also, the United States has long guaranteed Europe's safety with an arsenal of around 100 nuclear missiles, many of them stationed in a US military base in Germany. Let's now take a look at how the nuclear arms race started and where it might lead us. On the 6th of August in 1945, a US bomber dropped an atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. It resulted in the death of an estimated 140,000 people. This was the first time a nuclear weapon was used in a war. Just 3 days later, on the 9th of August, a second nuclear weapon codenamed Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. It killed at least 74,000 people. And 2 weeks after the attacks, Japan surrendered, thus ending the Second World War. However, this was not the world's first nuclear explosion. The first atomic bomb blew up on the 16th of July in 1945 in New Mexico. It was part of the United States government program called the Manhattan Project. The incident was even showcased in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. It came to be considered the beginning of the nuclear arms race, a nuclear arms race that continued over the years to advance and threaten.
The city of
When World War II ended in 1945, Europe lay in ruins. An estimated 15 million to 20 million people had lost their lives. World War II changed the landscape of intercontinental relations forever. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two global superpowers and rivals on the international stage. Then the Cold War began. The Cold War confrontation pitted the United States and its allies against the Soviet Union and its allies. During this period, from 1945 to 1991, the American stockpile of nuclear weapons reached its peak in 1966, with more than 32,000 warheads. In the year 1949, on the 29th of August, the Soviet Union exploded its first nuclear weapon at a test range in Kazakhstan. US intelligence assessments at the time had estimated that Moscow was at least 3 years away from obtaining such technology. In 1988, the Soviet nuclear stockpile reached its peak of about 33,000 operational warheads, with an additional 10,000 previously deployed warheads that had been retired but had not been taken apart. During the 1990s, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, many types of strategic weapons were retired and dismantled to comply with arms control negotiations. By 2010, the United States had approximately 9,400 warheads of 9 types, including 2 types of bombs, 3 types for intercontinental ballistic missiles, 2 types for submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and 2 types for cruise missiles. Of these 9,400 warheads, an estimated 2,468 were operational. The rest were either spares or retired warheads to be dismantled. As of today, 7 countries have nuclear weapons. Here they are on the world map: the United States, Russia, France, China, the United Kingdom, India and Pakistan. Apart from these, North Korea and Israel are also believed to possess nuclear weapons. However, they have not officially declared their stockpiles. Today, Russia and the USA together possess around 87% of all nuclear weapons. The sizes of these respective military stockpiles seem to have remained stable in 2024. But both states are implementing extensive modernization programs that could increase the size and diversity of their arsenals in the future. Let's look at which countries hold how much nuclear inventory. The world's combined inventory of nuclear warheads remain at a very high level. 9 countries possess about 12,241 warheads as of the beginning of 2025. Of the world's approximate 12,241 nuclear warheads, roughly 9,614 are in the military stockpiles for use by missiles, aircraft, ships and submarines. Globally, the overall inventory of nuclear weapons is declining, but the pace of reductions is slowing compared with the past 30 years. A report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, says that China has the world's fastest growing nuclear arsenal and has been adding 100 new warheads every year. China has one of the world's fastest and longest range road intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, the Dongfeng 41 or DF-41. It is China's most powerful strategic missile, clocking in at Mach 25 and boasting a maximum range of 15,000 kilometers. China claims that this solid-fuel missile can strike targets across continents within minutes. Let's take a look at the other fastest missiles that are redefining global deterrence. Russia's RS-28 Sarmat. It is Russia's massive liquid-fueled ICBM, dubbed Satan II by NATO. This 35-meter-long missile has a range of up to 18,000 kilometers, making it capable of striking virtually any target on Earth. USA's Minuteman III. Still operational after more than 5 decades, the LGM-30G Minuteman III remains the only land-based ICBM in active service with the US military. The Minuteman III can travel 13,000 kilometers and deliver MIRV nuclear warheads. Another ICBM developed by North Korea is Hwasong-15. It is North Korea's largest missile. This is India's Agni-5, an intermediate-range ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, developed by the Defense Research and Development Organization, or DRDO. It has a range of 7,000 kilometers. As we have seen, almost all nuclear-armed countries continue to modernize their nuclear forces at a rapid pace for an unpredictable future. Will the nuclear states ever give up their arsenal?
Well, I hope we'll never have a nuclear war. And if we see it being used, we probably won't be around afterwards to talk about it. But the point of the system is to defeat missile defenses like Golden Dome. So what I guess I would emphasize to people is, don't think about necessarily the day after this gets used, because we won't be here, but we are all going to have to live with the arms race that we're seeing, which is both the United States and Russia investing heavily in new offensive systems and defenses. And this is going to be a constant back and forth that's going to cost, trillions of dollars.
These monster missiles are weapons of mass destruction. They are primarily meant for deterrence and never to be used. The world only hopes that the dreaded red button is never pushed and these nukes remain in silos. Using these missiles by any nation is bound to attract immediate retribution, a catastrophic scenario which could end life on the planet as we know it.